His hands trembled as he braced the cane, every eye in the courtroom locked on him. "I haven't stood since Mosul," he whispered, and then against 2 decades of pain and silence, he rose. No one moved, not the judge, not the lawyers. Because in that moment, justice wasn't about rules, it was about bearing witness. Hi everyone. Today we're telling a story that took just one moment to unfold but shook an entire courtroom into silence. It's about a man who wasn't looking for sympathy, wasn't trying to make headlines, and certainly didn't think anyone would remember his name. But when a judge asked him to do something simple, something he physically hadn't done in almost 20 years, the room held its breath. And what happened next, it changed more than just one sentence. It changed lives. This could happen to anyone, even you. A missed document, a clerk's oversight, a single line in a system that doesn't pause to ask why. So before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? I always love knowing when and where these stories find you. Let's begin. It was just past 8:30 a.m. when Malcolm Reeves rolled up to the double oak doors of Courtroom 3B inside the Ramsey County Courthouse. St. Paul was already warming under a pale spring sun, but inside the courthouse everything felt colder. More still, more sterile. Like no one was meant to feel anything once they crossed the threshold. Malcolm, 61 years old and riding low in a scuffed-up motorized wheelchair, adjusted the sleeves on the one good suit he still owned. It didn't fit like it used to. His left shoulder was narrower than it had been before the shrapnel. His right pant leg was folded cleanly at the knee, where his leg had been amputated above the joint. He looked up at the door without flinching. Beside him walked his daughter Nia, 28, sharp-eyed, calm on the outside, but already clutching the manila folder like it might vanish. She had emailed those documents 3 times, even called the clerk's office to confirm. Medical records, disability assessments, VA confirmation of non-ambulatory status. All of it, twice over. Malcolm said nothing as the bailiff opened the door. The squeak of his wheels echoed across the courtroom floor like it didn't belong there. Rows of wooden benches, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. A few people sat scattered throughout the gallery, some clutching court notices, some just trying to stay awake. The public defender assigned to Malcolm's case, Jonas Fields, gave a brief wave from the front row without standing. Judge Cassandra Lowell sat elevated behind the bench, mid-50s, crisp gray suit, wireframe glasses, and the kind of expression that didn't change unless it absolutely had to. Her courtroom was known for being punctual, procedural, and mercilessly efficient. She didn't entertain excuses, and she didn't revisit settled matters. Malcolm and Nia took their place at the defense table. Jonas leaned over just enough to mutter, "She's in a mood today," as though that explained anything. Nia whispered to him, "Did the court receive the mobility exemption?" "The doctor's letter." Jonas glanced down at the file in front of him. He flipped a few pages, shrugged. "Not in this packet." Nia's stomach tightened. "We sent it. Twice." At that moment, the bailiff called the case State of Minnesota versus Malcolm Reeves. Judge Lowell didn't look up immediately. She tapped a few keys on her terminal. Her lips barely moved when she said, "Mr. Reeves, you are here today regarding a probation violation stemming from a deferred judgment in 2004. Are you aware of the charge?" Malcolm nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Failure to notify probation of your change of address last January." Nia opened her mouth to speak, but Jonas shook his head slightly. "Don't interrupt her." "Yes, ma'am," Malcolm replied quietly. Judge Lowell raised an eyebrow. "Do you understand the consequences if this violation is confirmed?" "I do." More typing. A beat of silence. Then the judge straightened in her seat. "Then we'll proceed to sentencing." Nia's head whipped toward Jonas. "Wait, what about the hearing?" He didn't wave. "The waiver is here," the judge said coolly, holding up a signed form. Malcolm leaned forward slightly. "I didn't know I waived anything." Lowell didn't blink. "The form has your signature. I was told I needed to sign everything to be processed." Jonas didn't say a word, just stared at the bench. The judge exhaled. "Regardless, we're proceeding. Mr. Reeves, as part of sentencing protocol, please rise." The room changed, just like that. Malcolm's face stayed still, but his fingers twitched slightly on the armrest of his chair. His voice came soft. "Your Honor, I haven't stood since Mosul." And with those 8 words, the entire courtroom froze. Judge Lowell looked up from her screen. Her mouth parted, then closed again. She checked the file. Nothing, no doctor's note, no exemption, just the charge. Do you have documented medical restrictions? Nia was already holding the folder up. Yes, we submitted them. His doctor faxed and emailed. I called twice to confirm. The judge looked to the clerk. Did we receive anything? The clerk scrolled through her screen, lips pressed thin. We received it. Your Honor, but it looks like it was never attached to the case file. Malcolm let out a dry chuckle. Of course, Judge Lowell hesitated. But rules were rules. Regardless of the documentation, we have to follow courtroom procedure unless a formal exemption is filed in the system. Malcolm looked at her, not angry, not pleading, just calm, steady. Then I'll try. Nia's voice cracked. Dad, you don't have to. I wanna, Malcolm said. His hand moved to the side of his chair, where a black cane had been tucked in like a secret. Jonas actually blinked, surprised. I've been practicing, Malcolm said softly. Not much, but enough to try. Every face in the courtroom turned, and then as the silence thickened into something sacred, Malcolm Reeves placed the cane against the floor, locked the wheels on his chair, and braced both arms on the rests. No one moved. Not the clerk, not the judge, not the lawyers. He inhaled deeply. His body tensed. His right arm shook violently, left elbow bending awkwardly against years of atrophy. And then he lifted. Not fast, not smooth, but deliberate, like a man who hadn't stood in almost 2 decades but remembered every second of what it used to feel like. Malcolm's right knee buckled before it fully locked. His fingers curled tightly around the cane, the tip tapping faintly against the polished floor as he fought gravity with trembling muscles and sheer will. His breath came hard through his nose-chest, rising in sharp intervals. You could see in his face this wasn't about defiance. This wasn't about spectacle. This was about something older, deeper, like dignity had a weight and he was determined to carry it one more time. Nia froze in place, one foot already halfway toward him, but he raised his other hand slightly. Not now. Not yet. A quiet gasp traveled through the courtroom. Not dramatic, just real. Judge Lowell remained seated, hands folded on the bench, her expression unreadable. But her eyes had locked on Malcolm's posture, and she wasn't blinking. I said I'd try, Malcolm murmured. His voice wasn't loud, but in a room that had gone completely still, it was the only thing that existed. He stood, for real this time. The cane wobbled slightly beneath him, and his left arm tensed with the kind of strength you only build when you've had to do everything with one side of your body for years. But he stood. Even Jonas Fields, who'd barely looked up from his notes during the entire proceeding, let his eyes rise now. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His face said what everyone else was thinking. This wasn't supposed to happen. Judge Lowell shifted in her chair. For the first time in her 15 years on the bench, the standard courtroom script didn't feel quite right. The automatic words, the ones she could recite in her sleep, refused to come. She cleared her throat and stood up slowly. Mr. Reeves, you don't need to. I'm not doing it for you, Malcolm interrupted softly. I'm doing it for me, for the guys who didn't come back, and the ones who did but never really stood again. That silenced whatever the judge had been about to say. In the second row, a man wearing a faded brown leather jacket with a patched-up 3rd Infantry Division emblem on the back leaned forward. He had salt and pepper stubble, a buzz cut gone soft with age, and eyes that didn't miss much. Malcolm Reeves, he said aloud. Malcolm turned his head slowly, steadying his body with the cane. Yeah. The man stood almost instinctively. Mosul 2004, convoy ambush on Route Sword. Malcolm blinked. You were in that unit, Henry Trask, the man replied, taking a step forward. Charlie Company. I was second truck. You pulled me out after the IED. Recognition flickered in Malcolm's face. Trask. You had shrapnel in your side, bleeding like a stuck pig. That was me. Trask smiled faintly. You threw me over your shoulder with one leg already gone. I thought you were hallucinating. A few people laughed softly, nervously. The judge did not. Henry looked at Judge Lowell. This man saved 5 of us that day. There was fire everywhere. Gunfire, screaming chaos. He couldn't feel his legs, but he kept dragging people to safety. They told me later he blacked out after the last run. His blood pressure dropped so low they didn't think he'd wake up. He turned back to Malcolm. And now you're in here being asked to stand like that means something, he shook his head. This man already stood your honor, in a way most people never will. The courtroom had stopped functioning like a legal space by then. No one was checking their phones. No one was whispering. It was just still. Judge Lowell pressed her lips together. She looked down at the file again, then back at Malcolm, then toward the clerk. Do we have any of this in the record? No, Your Honor, the clerk said quietly. No record of commendations, service history, or medical waivers beyond basic probation notes. That's a failure, Judge Lowell said. She said it aloud like it needed to be heard. I apologize, Mr. Reeves, she continued, her voice gentler now. If I had known Malcolm cut her off, would it have mattered that stopped her? He wasn't being cruel. He was just asking the question the whole room had felt from the start. Would it have mattered? The answer hung in the air, unanswered. Trask stepped fully into the aisle. It should have. Another silence. Then the moment broke, sort of. From the back of the courtroom, a young woman with a tablet and a sketch pad leaned down her pencil, moving across the page with fast light strokes. Her name was Sophia Delgado. She was 22, interning for the county public defender's office, and technically not supposed to be drawing during live court proceedings. But she couldn't stop. Something about Malcolm's stance, his cane pressed into the floor, the glint of pain and pride in his eyes, it felt like history was unfolding in real time. Not national headlines, not the stuff that made cable news, but the kind of quiet, forgotten dignity that deserved to be remembered. She would later say she didn't think. She just drew. At the front of the room, Judge Lowell slowly descended the steps from the bench. Another first. She walked toward Malcolm with steady steps, stopping only a few feet away from him. She didn't speak at first, just stood there eye to eye. You've reminded me, she said finally, that the law isn't supposed to come before the person, and I let it do just that. Malcolm exhaled through his nose. He was starting to tremble again. Nia stepped forward. Dad, please. You've proven your point. Sit before you fall. But Malcolm turned toward the judge again. I just wanted to be seen, he said. Not as a case number, not as a burden, as a man. Lowell didn't reply. Instead, she nodded once and stepped aside. Let's take a recess, she said, turning to the court. 10 minutes. But the courtroom wasn't in a rush to leave, because in that moment, no one really wanted to return to business as usual. When the judge stepped aside and declared a recess, no one moved. Not the clerk whose hands hovered above the keyboard. Not the bailiff who stood straighter than usual, as if respecting something sacred. Not the rows of defendants waiting their turn, people who had come in expecting bureaucracy and left watching a man quietly redefine strength. Malcolm hadn't sat down yet. He stood visibly trembling, sweat lining his brow, knuckles white against the handle of his cane. Nia moved to help, but he shook his head again. I can do one more minute, he whispered. Not for attention, not for applause, but because somewhere deep down he needed to own that moment. Judge Lowell turned back from the bench, still frozen in place, and sat this time, not because the courtroom told her to, but because she needed the grounding. Her mind had gone off script. The usual cadence of sentencing procedures, so routine and hardened over time, suddenly felt alien. Her fingers fidgeted near her gavel, but she didn't lift it. Instead, her eyes locked with Malcolm's again. She'd read hundreds of case files like his. Probation violations, missed forms, technical breaches. It was all the same in the system's eyes, but nothing had ever looked like this. A man without a leg rising, not to defend himself, but to affirm his existence in a room that hadn't offered it freely. Malcolm finally eased himself back into the chair, exhaling with a long breath that almost sounded like surrender, but wasn't. Nia helped guide the cane down, and her hand lingered on his shoulder as he adjusted the seat control to lean slightly back. I'm good, he muttered to her, voice low. Just needed to feel it. She nodded, swallowing hard. Across the room, Henry Trask hadn't sat either. He stood at ease like soldiers do in formal company. A younger bailiff leaned toward him and whispered something about returning to his seat, but Henry ignored it and no one pushed. He addressed the court again. I didn't plan on speaking, he said. But I couldn't let him stand alone. Judge Lowell gave him a slow nod of acknowledgement. Mr. Trask, you served with Mr. Reeves, I did. Charlie Company 1st Battalion, Mosul 2004. I was one of the last out of that convoy. Would you be willing to submit a sworn statement for the record, she asked. I'll submit whatever you need. I'm not here to make Malcolm look good. He doesn't need that. I'm here so people remember what standing means. Because I wouldn't be alive if he hadn't. No one questioned it. Not even Jonas, who now sat straighter and looked more alert than he had in the last 3 hearings combined. Back in the corner, Sofia Delgado's fingers moved faster across her tablet. She didn't realize yet what she was capturing. She didn't know the sketch would end up on every major social media platform within 48 hours. Didn't know it would appear in print on the front page of the Star Tribune with the headline, "The Stand That Stopped Everything." She just knew she had to draw. In the gallery, someone sniffled. Then someone else reached for a tissue. The courtroom had started to absorb something bigger than policy. It had become personal. Judge Lowell turned back to Malcolm. I owe you an apology, she said, voice lower now, less clipped. Malcolm looked at her but didn't respond. The court failed to process your documentation. That is not your fault. The consequences you face today, physical, emotional, procedural, should never have happened. And they happened on my watch. Still, Malcolm said nothing. But Naya Eyes Glassy spoke for him. He doesn't want pity, she said. He's never asked for it. He just wanted the system to treat him like he mattered. And then Malcolm added quietly, that's all any of us want. Judge Lowell stood again slower this time. Let the record reflect, she said clearly, that the defendant's medical documentation was timely submitted and lost due to administrative oversight. Let it also reflect that a credible eyewitness has testified to the defendant's character and military service, which had not been properly considered during probation review. She turned to Jonas. Mr. Fields, I strongly recommend you file a motion to vacate sentencing based on procedural failure. Yes, Your Honor? Jonas replied, the words almost catching in his throat. Lowell looked at Malcolm again. If it's all right with you, I'd like to take a short recess before we reconvene for final disposition. Malcolm nodded. The judge gathered her notes, stepped down from the bench, and disappeared through the side door. As the gallery finally began to shift, people rising, whispering, stretching their limbs, the court clerk leaned toward Jonas and whispered, that was something else. He nodded. I've been in this courtroom 10 years, never seen anything like it. In the hallway, as Nia guided Malcolm toward the nearest water fountain, Henry Trask caught up. Hey man, he said gently. I mean it. What you did back then saved me. What you did today, he paused, might have saved a whole lot more. Malcolm smiled, small and tired. Appreciate that, really. But I didn't stand to change anyone's mind. I stood because I needed to remember I could. Trask reached into his wallet and pulled out a laminated photo. 2 young men in fatigues, dust-covered, smiling beside a beat-up Humvee. You kept me standing longer than I deserved, he said. You still got that photo, Malcolm asked, eyes softening. Always, Trask said. Just didn't think I'd get to show it to you again. From the doorway, Sophia snapped a picture of the 2 men mid-embrace. She didn't post that one, not right away. That one was for her. Inside the courtroom, Judge Lowell sat alone in her chambers, staring at the docket for the afternoon. She saw names, case numbers, violations. But now they felt heavier, like each one might carry a life like Malcolm's, a full story packed into a file folder, no thicker than half an inch. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a notepad. She didn't know why. Maybe just to write something that wasn't dictated by precedent or policy. She wrote, justice without context is just paperwork. And beneath that, today I saw the weight of a single step. She closed the notebook. Outside, the hum of the hallway grew louder. But in her mind it was still silent, still echoing, still standing. 10 minutes later, when the court reconvened, the air in the room felt noticeably different. Not just quieter, but more alert, more human. It was as if everyone understood that the next few minutes weren't going to be routine, because nothing about what had happened was routine. Malcolm had returned to the defense table, his breath steady, a fresh bottle of water in his lap. Nia sat beside him, no longer clutching the manila folder. There was no need. The courtroom had already seen what mattered. Judge Lowell entered through the chamber door. This time as she stepped up to the bench, she didn't look mechanical. She looked present. She paused longer before speaking, glanced at Malcolm, then to the gallery, then back to her desk. "We are resuming proceedings in the matter of State of Minnesota versus Malcolm Reeves," she began, but her voice held less of the usual sharp formality. "Before continuing, I want the record to reflect a change in tone and responsibility. This court did not act in alignment with the values of justice earlier today. That falls on me." She glanced toward the clerk, who was already typing furiously to keep up. Malcolm simply gave a quiet nod. At that exact moment, someone's phone buzzed faintly in the gallery, an older man who'd forgotten to turn it off. He silenced it quickly, embarrassed, but not before a few noticed. On his screen had been the sketch, posted just 5 minutes ago. The courtroom had been drawn in clean, gentle strokes, no names, no caption, just a man standing with a cane, a judge watching from the bench, and a daughter close by. The artwork captured the tension, the stillness, the weight. It was being shared quietly and quickly across social media by the minute. Sofia Delgado had uploaded it without fanfare, with just a short line. "Today I saw something you can't explain with law books." She didn't expect it to spread, but it did. First among law students, then local veteran forums, then activists, then morning show producers. The image started traveling faster than any of them knew, but none of that mattered to Malcolm. Not yet. All he knew was that the judge was speaking again. "Mr. Fields," she said to the public defender, "have you prepared the motion to vacate based on procedural error?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jonas replied, voice clearer now. "Filed and printed." Lowell reviewed it briefly, then turned back to Malcolm. "Do you have anything to say before I issue final disposition?" Malcolm shifted slightly in his chair, then looked at the judge, not with anger, not even with expectation. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about rules," he said. "How they're written for fairness, but don't always land that way. I'm not asking the court to change for me. I'm just asking that people like me stop getting left behind by a system that moves too fast to notice when it misses something." Lowell listened. So did everyone else. He continued, "I wasn't trying to prove anything today. I just wanted to remind myself I'm still capable of something. Even if it hurts, even if it doesn't change anything on paper." "It changed more than that," Nia whispered. Lowell exhaled slowly. "I believe you've more than fulfilled your obligation to this court," she said, "and to this community. Your probation violation is hereby vacated. Your original record will be flagged for discretionary review, pending full dismissal by the county attorney." Gasps rippled again, quiet but sincere. Malcolm didn't flinch. Nia's eyes filled instantly. Then for the second time that day, the courtroom rose to its feet, but not because someone told them to. They stood as if they couldn't sit anymore. Jonas whispered, "Sir, that never happens." Lowell looked out over the courtroom. "Let me be clear. This man's sentence isn't just being vacated because of military service or hardship. It's because he demonstrated beyond any legal argument what accountability, grace, and perseverance actually look like." As Malcolm turned his wheelchair toward the aisle, a familiar hand reached out from the gallery. Henry Trask, now teary-eyed, stood in the center of the room. They clasped hands. "You ever want to come speak at the VFW?" Trask said softly. "You just let me know." "I might just do that," Malcolm replied. And then just as they were about to exit, the courtroom doors opened and a tall man in a dark polo shirt walked in, holding up a phone. "Sir," he said, looking toward Malcolm, "I'm with Minnesota Public Radio. That sketch of you standing just went viral. 15,000 shares in an hour. They're asking for your name." Nia blinked. Already Judge Lowell raised an eyebrow. Sketch Sophia, face flushed, slowly raised her hand from the back of the room. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," she said. I sketched what I saw. I didn't name anyone. I just wanted people to remember the moment." Lowell considered it. "Let me see." The man stepped forward, turned the phone toward the judge, and she stared. Her own figure was in the image, slightly backlit, watching, not judging, just witnessing. Something in her expression shifted. Malcolm wheeled up slowly, looking at the screen. "I didn't expect that." "You weren't supposed to," Sophia said quietly. "But we needed it." Nia leaned in. "Dad, this could help more than just us. What if people see this and stop writing veterans off as red tape and burden?" He gave her a faint smile. then maybe today was worth it. Sophia stepped forward. There's a fund starting already. People are donating in your name for wounded vets housing stability legal aid. It's already raised over $3,000 in 2 hours. Judge Lowell stepped back and said nothing. For once, she knew she didn't need to lead the room. People were already moving voluntarily, respectfully, and with purpose. As Malcolm reached the courtroom doors, a few reporters were already waiting. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just rolled forward, Nia beside him, saying gently, one step at a time, right outside. The light hit them just right. And inside that building, for the first time in years, the system felt like it might finally be paying attention. The following morning, Malcolm sat in his cousin's kitchen in East St. Paul, a coffee in one hand and a half-eaten cinnamon roll in the other. He wasn't sure how many times his phone had buzzed overnight, but the notifications had filled the screen by the time the sun rose. News alerts, messages, donation updates, requests for interviews. Some from major outlets, NPR, CBS, even a note from a producer at The View. He scrolled through a few before setting the phone aside. It was all moving fast, faster than he was used to. Nia walked in holding her own phone. She looked up with wide eyes. Dad, it's over $90,000 now. He blinked. 90, she nodded. They're calling it the Stand with Malcolm Fund, started by a group of law students and veterans. People are tagging stories, sharing memories. Even some old buddies from Mosul are coming forward. You're a headline in 15 states. Malcolm shook his head and took a sip of coffee. I stood up one time in 20 years, and now people want me to be a symbol. You didn't ask to be, Nia said. That's what makes it matter more. Across town in Judge Lowell's chambers, the atmosphere was just as shifted. She sat at her desk, not in front of case files or briefings, but reading emails. Hundreds. Some from veterans, others from public defenders, a few from judges in other states who had watched the viral clip of Malcolm standing, shot quietly by someone in the gallery, and uploaded overnight. They weren't just reacting to the moment. They were reflecting on themselves, on the system, on what happens when legal procedure forgets it's dealing with human lives. A knock came at her door. It was her clerk holding a white envelope. It's from Mr. Reeves, he said. Lowell opened it. No postage. Hand-delivered. Inside was a folded note in Malcolm's handwriting. Judge Lowell, thank you for listening eventually. Thank you for seeing me, not just ruling over me. I don't know what happens next, but I hope the next guy like me doesn't need a viral moment to be heard. Malcolm Reeves. She closed the note and set it gently on her desk. That afternoon, Malcolm and Nia met Henry Trask at a local VFW hall where they sat with a group of veterans, some old, some young, sharing stories, passing around a printed version of Sophia's sketch. Henry slapped the table at one point and said, "Who'd have thought your knees would start a national conversation?" Malcolm chuckled. They've never been quiet since the blast. Figured they might as well say something useful. By the following week, Malcolm had spoken to a high school civics class, appeared on a podcast about veterans' rights, and helped co-write a guide on how disabled vets can navigate probation check-ins without falling through the cracks. But through it all, he stayed grounded. He declined a request to be flown to D.C. for a press event. I don't fly unless I have to, he told them. These wheels work just fine on the ground. He started signing his emails with a line that had made its way into the sketch's caption and across social media banners. I don't stand easy, but I stand when it counts. Sofia Delgado, meanwhile, was interviewed by her university. She never took credit for starting the movement. She always said the same thing: all I did was draw what was already there. One day, while sitting at a bench outside the courthouse, Malcolm saw someone approaching. A woman in her late 20s, dressed plainly, holding a worn folder. She looked nervous. Are you the guy from the video, she asked. Malcolm nodded. Depends which one you saw. She laughed nervously. The courtroom, the one where you stood. I remember that day. She held up the folder. I've got a hearing next week. Nothing big, just a mess of paperwork I can't fix. But seeing what you did made me feel like maybe it's not hopeless. Malcolm smiled. It's not. It never is. It just feels that way sometimes because the system wants you to give up before you start. She nodded, then added, thanks. Not just for standing, but for staying. He tapped the side of his wheelchair. This thing's not going anywhere fast. Later that evening, Malcolm sat on the porch with Nia. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the street. "You tired yet?" she asked. "I'm always tired," he said, "but I'm also awake. That's new." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know they're talking about naming the new Veterans Legal Access Bill after you," he sighed. "That's too much." "No, it's not." He looked out at the fading light fingers, drumming gently on the cane resting beside him. "You know, for 20 years I thought I was just trying to survive. But maybe all that time, I was still trying to stand." Nia squeezed his hand. "You did, Dad." And in the silence that followed, no camera rolling, no crowd cheering, Malcolm Reeves sat in peace, not because the world had changed entirely, but because for once it had paused to notice he was there. He hadn't planned to make history. He just didn't want to be forgotten. And in trying to be seen, he helped the whole world see a little better. Some stories make headlines because they're loud. This one did because it was quiet, because it reminded us that power doesn't always shout, and dignity doesn't always come in the form of a title or a robe. Sometimes it's a man with a cane, a man who hadn't stood in decades but still believed in standing for what matters. Malcolm Reeves didn't ask to be the face of anything. He wasn't after viral fame or applause. He just wanted to be treated like a person, like his life meant more than a line in a file. And in taking that one trembling step, he moved more than just his body. He moved people's hearts. He moved a courtroom. He moved a system. That's the power of being seen. So if you've ever felt overlooked, forgotten, passed by, remember this: one step, one voice, one honest moment can ripple farther than you think. And sometimes doing the hard thing for the right reason is enough to change more than just your path. It changes the road for those coming behind you. Let's build a world where we don't need viral sketches to notice each other's humanity, where dignity is given, not earned through suffering, where justice doesn't have to be demanded, it's simply delivered. If this story moved, you consider reaching out to a veteran. Donate to local legal aid organizations. Speak up when the system forgets someone. And most of all, stand for those who can't. Because real justice isn't cold. It's courageous. And sometimes it starts with a step.